one standing when all the giants fell. I won't shiver, I won't shake.
Jefferson Davis was the only leader that governed the former short-lived Confederate state of America. Davis was born in Kentucky but was raised in Mississippi. His older brother, Joseph, influenced his interest in slavery since he was a planter and a father figure to Davis. He later graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. In 1843, after resigning from the army and being a plantation owner for 8 years, he got into the career of politicians. In 1845, Davis became a member of the U.S. House of Representatives in Mississippi through an election. In 1846, Davis abandoned his position in Congress to fight in the Mexican-American War as a colonel commanding the 1st Mississippi Rifle Regiment. As a colonel in the Mexican-American War, his most successful battles were the Battle of Buena Vista and the Battle of Monterey. In 1847, he was appointed Senator of Mississippi due to his military accomplishments. As a senator, he advocated for the southern interest of slavery. In 1851, Davis was appointed Secretary of War by President Franklin Pierce. As the Secretary of War, Davis devoted his efforts to the safety of Western settlers, recruiting, advancement of weapons, and the national security of the United States. In February of 1861, Davis was elected the president of the newly created Confederate State of America, due to his success in the military and politics. He abandoned his position in the Senate due to his home state seceding from the Union. On May 10th of 1865, he was captured and imprisoned for 2 years at Fort Monroe. In December of 1889, Jefferson died of acute bronchitis in New Orleans. Robert E. Lee was a general in the Army of the Confederate State of America. He commanded Confederate forces at 2 notable battles in the Civil War, which are Antietam and Gettysburg. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865, marking the end to the Civil War. Lee was born on January 19th of 1807 at a plantation in Virginia known as Stratford Hall. His family was rich and well respected by people, but due to his father's poor financial decisions, his family quickly ended up in poverty. This caused Lee to seek a military education at U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Lee was assigned to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers after his graduation at West Point. In 1847, Lee was successful in leading troops at the Battle of Veracruz, which is part of the Mexican-American War. Lee inherited a plantation from his father-in-law, and historical accounts stated that he was a cruel slave owner. In 1861, Lee joined the Confederacy as a general and declined a request to be a commander for the Union troops because he did not want to become enemies with his acquaintance at his home state of Virginia. On October 12th of 1870, Lee suffered a stroke and passed away. Ulysses S. Grant was born on April 27th of 1822 in Point Place, Ohio. He is the eldest son in the family, and his father was a tanner. The U.S. Military Academy at West Point offered a deal: a high-quality, free education upon graduation in exchange for military service. So his father applied for him, and he was accepted. Since it was too late to write his name as Ulysses Simpson, which is his mother's surname, he signed his signature, Ulysses S. Grant. After graduation, he was assigned to the infantry unit in 1840. Grant was assigned to the 4th Regiment at Jefferson's Camp, south of St. Louis, Missouri. Lieutenant Grant's regiment moved further south, first to Louisiana and then to Texas, preparing for a brewing conflict with Mexico and Texas territory. From 1846 to 1847, he was twice commended for his bravery and appointed quartermaster of the 4th Infantry Regiment. In 1854, he resigned from the army. In 1861, Grant led an army of 3,000 men in his first major battle. In February of 1862, Grant accepted the surrender of the entire Confederate Army at Fort Donelson. In 1863, Grant orchestrated the capture of Vickers Castle in Mississippi. On April 9th of 1865, the main force of the Confederate Army surrendered to Grant, effectively ending the war. In 1868, Grant accepted the Republican nomination for president and was re-elected for 2 terms. During his re-election campaign in 1872, Grant was attacked by liberal Republican reformers. In 1877, Grant resigned. The family moved back to New York and invested in a company he co-owned with his son. He died on July 23rd of 1885 and had a grand funeral procession in New York City. Before the Civil War, Stonewall Jackson fought in the Mexican War, and soon, when he grew older, he was promoted to be a general officer for the Confederate States Army during the Civil War. He kept terrorizing the Union and had bad behavior as a general to his troops. When the Union arrived at Henry Hill, Stonewall Jackson's army came as a backup and pushed the Union back to Washington. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, the Confederate won the attack, and when retreating, Jackson accidentally got shot by one of his men in the army. Many people thought Jackson would recover, but it got worse, and he died 2 days later on May 10th, 1863. Tecumseh was a Shawnee Indian political leader and leader of the Pan-Indian Coalition. Murder, massacre, and the invasion of the Shawnees' lands and the destruction of their crops deepened a hatred of whites that was instilled by his mother. At the age of 14, he accompanied Blackfish in the combined British and Indian attacks against Americans during the American Revolution. He then directed the unsuccessful attack on Fort Recovery in June of 1794. When the Treaty of Greenville was negotiated in 1795, Tecumseh refused to recognize it. Seeing the approach of the War of 1812 between the Americans and the British, Tecumseh assembled his followers and joined the British forces at Fort Malden on the Canadian side of the Detroit River. There, he brought together perhaps the most formidable force ever, commanded by a North American Indian, an accomplishment that was a decisive factor in the capture of Detroit and of 2,500 U.S. soldiers. He returned north and joined the British General Henry A. Proctor in his invasion of Ohio. Together, they besieged Fort Meigs, held by William Henry Harrison, on the Maumee River above Toledo. He and Proctor failed to capture the fort. However, Harrison thereupon invaded Canada. Tecumseh with his Indians reluctantly accompanied the retiring British, whom Harrison pursued to the Thames River. There, the British and Indians were routed, and Harrison won control of the Northwest. Tecumseh, directing most of the fighting, was killed. Tecumseh's death marked the end of Indian resistance in the Ohio River Valley and in most of the lower Midwest and South. And soon thereafter, the depleted tribes were transported beyond the Mississippi River.